This all of a sudden went from a bar to the church.
You say amen in both places, don't you?
You do say amen in both places. I'm going to kick things off here. What a treat to be here in the People's Republic of Montclair, which Leo tells me they named a variety after. Let's hear it for Leo and Denise Sawadego, who are the Sawadogos. You've been here since when?
2018.
Where's Denise?
2018.
2018. You have your own table, Denise.
Yes. I have someone who's supposed to be sitting here with me. Joins me.
How's business?
It's okay. It's okay. After COVID was good, but things are slowing down. After COVID, things were good, but things are slowing down a little bit. I just think because of the economy. But we're still here. We're able to make the bills. We're able to pay payroll and have a little bit to pay ourselves as well. So we take the wins where we can, and we're looking forward to the future. We know that things will get better. Eventually, it will get better, and we will be here for
Your
it.
lips to God's ears. So thank you. And thanks
you.
to Leo as well for hosting us so graciously. We've got some pretty special people. Before we talk about the special folks up on stage with us, I want to acknowledge the great mayor of Montclair, Dr. Renee Baskerville, is right with us. To her right, Assemblywoman Alexan Colatzos-Gill. To Renee's left, Essex County Commissioner and dear longstanding friend and confidant, Brendan Gill. We have Sarah Curitan from the New Jersey Historical Commission, and Carrie Fellows from Crossroads of the American Revolution. Let me start at my far left and bring it across, if I may. On the far left is Professor Michael Blakeman of Princeton University. Let's hear it for Michael. Michael is a historian of revolutionary and early national America. He's a graduate of the College of William and Mary, and hold this thought a moment if you could, has a PhD in history from Yale University. He's written a ton of stuff. A couple of things that caught my eye. He came from the University of St. Thomas to Princeton in 2018. He wrote a book called Speculation Nation. He wrote another book. Is it coming out, The Simcoes and the Enemies of the American Revolution?
It's in the works.
It's in the works. Will that be the title?
Ask me in 8 years, maybe. It's a long project.
Oh, 8 years. Okay. Good luck with that. But he's just done a bunch of cool stuff. To Michael's right is a dear friend, Dr. Jonathan Holloway, not just a distinguished professor, but the president of Rutgers University since July 1, 2020. Let's hear it for both guys. Undergraduate work at Stanford, where he played football, by the way, with Cory Booker. How about that little fun fact?
I've watched football.
You watched
while Cory
football?
played.
But unlike me, you watched it in a uniform. And also, ready for this? PhD in history from Yale University. Jonathan, like Michael, is a prodigious historian, scholar, and author, and has found time to publish books even while president of Rutgers. A couple of them jump out: African American History, a very short introduction, and The Cause of Freedom, a history of African Americans. And The Cause of Freedom has a lens, if you will, through which Jonathan views history that I think we'll probably come back to. And finally, last but not least, the woman to my left, my partner in government, the Lieutenant Governor of the great state of New Jersey and Secretary of State. Let's hear it for Tahisha Way. Neither Tahisha nor I claim to have a PhD in history from Yale University, but Tahisha is a distinguished, not just public servant, but herself with a distinguished academic career Brown undergraduate, University of Virginia Law School, a great lieutenant governor, a great partner in government, former judge, former, at that point, freeholder. She's one of those, they say in baseball, a five-tool athlete, does it all. So, Tahisha, let's hear it one more time for this extraordinary lineup.
Governor, you forgot to tell them that I did all of that by the age of 22.
That is correct, by the age of 22. And she's a mom of 4 great gals. And she's married to the New York Football Giants. Literally. I want to say something, Tahisha, and see if you agree before we jump in and start throwing topics to our distinguished guests. We started putting our sort of program together for the American Revolution, the 250th anniversary, semi-quincentennial, which is not a word that rolls off your tongue, at least my tongue, which will be obviously July 4th, 2026. Interestingly, we will no longer be in office. But like the World Cup, which is that month as well, we want to make sure we lay all the seeds and the tracks to make sure that whoever it is that succeeds Tahisha and me have something that's alive, vibrant, viable, etc. I think there's two, and I want you to react to this to see if you agree. There were 2 dimensions that we were and are obsessed with. One of them is to make sure that New Jersey's story in the revolution is properly told. I was born, by the way, this gets me no votes in New Jersey, in Boston. I grew up near Lexington and Concord, or if you look at Independence Hall in Philadelphia, you would think that the entire revolution took place in those 2 metro areas, when in fact, George Washington spent more time in New Jersey during the war than any other state or colony. There were more battles in New Jersey than any other colony. And so one objective, I'd love you to react to this, is that we wanted to make sure we were punching at our weight, that the oxygen wasn't sucked out of the celebration and commemoration by we got nothing against Massachusetts or Pennsylvania or the nation's capital, but we want Jersey's story to be told. And then the other more specific reason for tonight, we have tavern talks. I'm told this is not a tavern talk, because those are, we've done, how many have we done, guys? 4, and we've got another, how many? Another 3 coming up. But those all include reenactors, am I right? So that's, again, a tavern setting like this great brewery. Shameless commercial for this place, which we love. But those are reenactors that go through a particular vignette in the Revolution. This, as you can see, is not that. But what this is, and this is an important, it's not the only moment we're going to shine a light on this, but we also share a passion for making sure the undertold stories, particularly of Black Americans, get told. And that's a big reason why we're here tonight. It's not the only thing we'll talk about in the next period of time, but it's a big part of why we wanted to be here. Again, let's get Jersey's story punching at its weight, and let's make sure the untold or undertold stories, particularly of African-American slaves and soldiers and others, make sure that story gets told, that we tell the whole story, nothing but the truth, even when it hurts. So that's the sort of guiding principle. Anything you want to add to that frame, Tahisha?
And sure, Governor.
I'm going to drink while you speak.
Exactly. I'm going to do the same because
Cheers.
I got the motherland here.
You did.
It's all about.
Cheers, guys. Jonathan, Michael, here.
Delicious. 100%, Governor, because this is what we did when we celebrated the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, when women gained the right to vote. Sarah, you know what I'm talking about. We wanted to make sure that we were inclusive as to all women, Black women, indigenous women, Latinas, just so that New Jerseyans and everyone will get the true picture of what was going on the streets, in the ground, right? And so, you know, it's good that we're here with Leo and Denise, and shout out again to them. They showed up for our New Jersey Taste of New Jersey event in New York City, and the critics actually said your brewery was the best. Yes. There's a secret. But, you know, with me being here with all of the distinguished gentlemen right? There's a distinguished woman behind us on the mural, Denise. And when we're talking about telling the entirety of what was going on, you know, I think that it's often overlooked Black women, okay, and their role during this time. So if I may turn to our distinguished professors and ask them to give us some color as to the Black women's role during this time, we would hear, and I know I've read, how Black women turned to the loyalist side, hopes that they could become free, go to Canada. So can you give us a few or a lot more words in terms of this? What was going on with the Black female experience?
Michael, you want to start? We'll go left to right again.
Yeah, sure. I can start us off. So first of all, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for your hospitality, Denise and Leo. And Lieutenant Governor Way, I agree entirely that this is it's a vital part of the American revolutionary experience, and it's often overlooked for reasons that have a lot to do with inequalities in the present, and also for reasons that have a lot to do with, let's say, inequalities in the historical record. Black women's stories can be much harder, much more difficult to trace in the archives and to flesh out as fully as we would like to as historians. But there are some, there's some exceptional individuals who come to mind from the American Revolutionary era. People like Phyllis Wheatley, the enslaved poet, who sort of forced white patriot leaders to reckon with Black literary genius and factor that into the way they perceived the world, or confront the dissonance of her literary expertise with the way they viewed the world. There's also people who were, freedom fighters in a legal sense, who sort of seized the moment of the American Revolution and the rhetoric of colonial protests, the sort of emphasis on liberty as the essential political value, seized on that rhetoric and turned it towards their own ends, kind of co-opted it, not to critique the British Parliament, King George III, but for their own purposes. This is the case with a woman who was enslaved in Massachusetts by the name of Mum Bet, who in the early 1780s, after several years of warfare, after a decade and a half of patriots constantly spouting off about liberty this and liberty that, caught wind of the fact that the new state constitution of Massachusetts enshrined a natural right to liberty, and said, well, wait a minute, I'm in a condition of slavery. It sounds like that's unconstitutional. She launched a freedom suit in the state of Massachusetts, her as well as a small handful of other enslaved individuals in Massachusetts. And as a result, the courts said, yes, slavery is illegal. It's unconstitutional in Massachusetts. This is how one of the 13 original states ended slavery, was through freedom suits by people like Mum Bet, who, by the way, last thing I'll say on this point is after she received this verdict and was freed, memorialized her new status in a new name that she chose for herself, and that name was Elizabeth Freeman.
Very cool.
So I'm going to confess I'm a total history nerd, because I was enjoying all of this. Michael is a specialist in the area. I'm in the era. I'm not. I work in more 20th century American history. But I could have just sat back and just keep on giving the lecture. This is a wonderful thing. I want to speak about one thing specifically, though, just to really underscore, because I'll be speaking about this later on, I anticipate, with Phyllis Wheatley, who was largely unrecognized until the last, I'll say 20 years, that's ballpark, when people started to discover individuals like Phyllis Wheatley or other famous figures, that has been written out of history. And finding the archival trail is hard, but not in this case. It was there. And what's amazing, and not amazing in a positive way, amazing in a complicated way, is that for Phyllis Wheatley to be recognized as legitimate, I use those terms very intentionally, her work had to be vetted by white males. And this speaks to a much larger phenomenon about who authorizes who belongs in our national narrative. And there's so many elements of, in this case, black women. It could be in different eras, Latinx populations. It could be LGBTQ. It could be people who are written out of history. Someone has authorized them access. But that's never a guarantee that they'll maintain access. And we're living in that moment now where that access is, I mean, I'm sorry to be political, but I'm heading out the door as president. I'm going to say whatever I want to say. The fact is we are in a moment when U.S. history, that's something that Michael and I care deeply about. I mean, that's our professional career. The things that I've written about for 30 years are being rendered, are being erased under the authorization of the federal government. It's a very difficult moment. And I love the fact that we are in New Jersey. We, Public State University of New Jersey, is in New Jersey. I love the fact we have a governor and lieutenant governor who are going to show up in Black History Month at the largest black-owned brewery in the state. I love the fact that you're unabashed about supporting this stuff because you're willing to do that fight and authorize me, in a sense, to talk about this stuff. And I can authorize my faculty, in a sense, to talk about this stuff. So I've long since left your question behind. But the fact is, there's a larger phenomenon that weaves through history to the present day that we should be paying attention to.
It's a great, both points are great points, but that last one, the moment in time that we're having this conversation, is quite striking, to be diplomatic. By the way, we're also leaving town within a year, so Michael, you're going to be the last one standing
I'm
here.
stuck here. I've just got tenure. I'm stuck here.
Hey, I meant to ask you this. Were you guys, did you overlap at all at Yale, or?
I just found out, I'm embarrassed, I just found out that we did. And
No need to be embarrassed. Jonathan was on the faculty. I was a pipsqueak of a graduate student. So I knew who he was and have followed his career with great interest
Okay.
ever since. It was great to finally meet him.
Just checking. Tahisha, you and I had also wanted, do you see these screens in this cool setup here we have here? By the way, you got a lot of, do you get a lot of folks coming in for sporting events here?
Not a lot, mostly you.
Leo's saying yes, and Denise is saying no. Okay, well, we got that coming up for you. But how cool is this? I want to call it a logo, but this is going to start running. And we made the decision we're actually going to run this in a full-page ad in, among other places, the Boston Globe, to make sure that
Love
they
it.
know that we're in town. We're from Jersey, baby. How about the paradox, guys, in whatever order you'd like to address this, Tahisha, if I may, where you've got enslaved blacks fighting for freedom and liberty for the colonies, and I guess to some degree turning that rhetoric back on its head, saying, hey, what about us? And yet the reality, you each mentioned a couple of individuals, the reality is that needle didn't move in any meaningful way. I think that's probably charitable. And any thoughts either of you have on that? Jonathan, do you want to jump in?
Sure, I'll jump in. So this is my big story of the evening. I'll be short as I can with it. So it's a story about Concord, Massachusetts, Governor. I apologize, but it's so I spent a couple of years there when I was very young. My military family bounced around. My mother did a headstone, a rubbing of a headstone in a cemetery in Concord, Massachusetts. The location is very important. And that headstone rubbing was hanging in the family in the basement for 20 years before I finally read it. And I read it on the day I was heading up to start grad school up in Connecticut. And like a good historian, after I read it, I'm like, that's amazing. And I took it off the wall, drove it up to New Haven, called my mother. I'm in New Haven safely. She goes, and that headstone rubbing, she goes, what happened to it? I'm like, I stole it. And the reason I stole it, the reason I acquired it was because the opening lines, there's a long story behind it. I'll just give you the opening lines. God wills us free, man wills us slave. I will as God wills, God's will be done. Right? So I read that. I read it. I'm like, wait a sec. Read it several times, and the epitaph goes on. It's like layers and layers and layers. And the very short story is this gentleman named John Jack, not his birth name, born a free person in Africa, land of slavery, captured somehow, is brought over to colonial New England, Concord, Massachusetts, where he's taught a trade. He's basically a cobbler. His master was, in the language in a kind master, allowed him to keep money, so he eventually bought himself. He bought his emancipation. He also bought land, a subsistence farm. Then he had petitioned the citizens of Concord, which were white male property owners. Those are the three things, or male property owners, excuse me. He petitioned them to become a citizen, like they were. These were the same citizens who were complaining to King George, this is very much resonant with the story you were telling, that they were being denied citizenship and that they were being treated like slaves. Their language, ignoring the slaves that they owned. So here's a guy through his hard work, raised as a slave in a land of liberty, acquires his freedom through slave labor, and petitions to become recognized as a citizen. And the citizen said, well, there's a caveat, you're once in bondage, so you can't become a citizen. That's not in the rules, but they made it up on the spot. So this guy basically becomes an alcoholic, drinks himself to death. And as he's dying, he hires somebody to put his modest affairs in order. And that's the person who wrote this epitaph that I hinted at. I'm not reading the whole epitaph. And the guy was a loyalist to the British Crown. So in this founding moment of, and this also, he died in 1773 in Concord at the moment of revolution. I mean, the eve of it, I should say. He saw it. He saw the DNA of what this country is going to be. And the reason I would offer my post-emancipation lecture course, I start there. It's the opening slide my students would see. So I want them to understand, if you want to know why people hang on to freedom, why it was so important to the citizens in Concord, it's because they knew what slavery was. Like, this is part of the DNA of this country. This is why I'm so infuriated by this moment of erasure. It's that if you want to know what freedom is, you need to understand that there are people who've been denied freedom. That's the logic of the country. Now, I want to make it clear, I love this country. And I love it because I can say this and have a job and not be thrown in jail. That's today. So there was a founding irony in this great country that talks about belonging, has this lofty rhetoric that is unknown in human history and has been sustained for so long. But nothing is guaranteed, it seems. And this is part of the struggle.
Jonathan, before we go to Michael, did your mother know the story when she did the rubbing?
She did. The story of John Jack, it's in a cemetery. John Jack is buried in a cemetery in Concord. And that was well known then, and there was a lot of people doing headstone rubbings. The headstone was replaced over and over again, and it became an anthem for abolitionist movements in the 19th century, even though people were See, I'm about to get nerdy on you. People were misinterpreting what it was about. It was a critique of this founding of the country, but it was taken as a document that heralded its successes. But now you can't do headstone rubbings anymore of that because it was doing too much damage. But since I acquired that headstone rubbing, my mother said, bless her heart, it's where it belongs. And as I was becoming a historian, and in every office I've ever been in, that's been there. And I think it's very important that the president of the State University of New Jersey, one of the 9 colonial colleges of the state, has in his office a document, a rather large one, I'd say 2.5 by 3 feet, a large document that's trying to work through the riddle of what this great country is all about and speaks to the people who have been erased from that history.
I love, God bless, what a story. Tahishi, before you jump back in, Michael, anything more you want to add? Jonathan called it a riddle, I call it a paradox, but how did folks square this at the time?
Yeah, I'd love to jump in. Jonathan, that was so beautifully and profoundly put. And I want to just elaborate for a minute on what you called the founding irony. So at Princeton, I teach a lecture course on the American Revolution, and for the first few weeks of the semester, we're reading sources from throughout all kind of classes and statuses of society, but including some of the formal political rhetoric where colonists, participating in the Continental Congress and whatnot, are articulating the complaints that would lead them to declare independence. And they do use the word, as Jonathan mentioned, slavery again and again and again. And I'm coming back to this because my students have such a hard time understanding it. I mean, people, patriot leaders from Virginia, Richard Henry Lee, for instance, who enslaved about 50 or 60 people in the 1770s, describing the Stamp Act as the chains of slavery. Jonathan Dickinson, a lawyer and patriot leader from Pennsylvania and Delaware, describing the Townsend Acts in 1768 as equivalent to the most abject slavery, taxation without our consent. My students just, they trip on it. They go, what the heck is this? Is this a joke? Is this a metaphor? It wasn't. It was the political language available to white Americans in the 18th century, or I should say to members of the British Empire in the 18th century, for describing somebody without liberty. And the key there is that ideas about liberty and slavery in the Revolutionary era were deeply intertwined. They made each other. They were mutually constitutive. People understood liberty in large part in explicit contrast to the condition of the people that so many of them enslaved. So that language is baked into the debates that produce American independence. But, and here I think we get to your question about reconciling the paradox, Governor, I do think that language created an opening because Black Americans themselves in the Revolutionary era continually pointed out the contradiction and forced the issue. And so in, whether they're suing for individual freedom in Massachusetts like Elizabeth Freeman, or participating in anti-slavery, political campaigns in places like Pennsylvania or New York or eventually New Jersey, one of the things they do is continually point out the contradiction in that rhetoric. If you say that this is a land defined in opposition to slavery, show us that you mean it. And in fact, they did actually move the needle in some states, because one of the consequences of the American Revolution is that slavery in the northern states, the places where it was least economically significant, but certainly present, was either ended during the Revolutionary era or set on a path to gradual extinction, in large part because of the Black Americans who pointed out that contradiction.
Including here, I believe, right? That New Jersey in the early 1800s, I know, started that process. Thanks, guys. Tahisha.
Yeah, I think I'm going to get nerdy too. Is that okay?
That's great.
And, at a bar, that's what President Holloway and I decided to do at the bar. As, there's the national emergency drink, right? That I think you were talking about. So, and I think, President Holloway, you can answer this question, because we're talking about tensions, contradictions, and debates, right? Now, when I was an undergrad 5 years ago in college. Oh, okay, thank you. So, one of the things that I focused on and studied was race as an ideological construct, right? That the race Black is created to reflect one being inferior, right, in ranking. So could you give a comment based on your inquiry, your scholarship, relating it today? What does it mean to be Black? And how do you view race in the context of the time period? And who does our story truly belong to? That's a lot, but that's what we nerdy folks do.
That's a course.
Exactly.
So that is a lot, but they're really big questions. I'm going to answer it in a very personal way. Since you asked, what does it mean to be? How do I interpret it? When I was introduced as as president of Rutgers University back in 2020, almost exactly 5 years ago, it was mid-January. Someone asked me the inevitable question: "What you're the first Black president of the institution. How does that feel?" And I was a bit. I mean, I knew it was coming. I had a little edge to it because it's a predictable question. I understand where it's coming from, but it's also predictable in a way that I find frustrating. I said, look, I don't get out of bed thinking Black thoughts. I don't walk around no, it's funny. Thank you for laughing. You're the only one. But I don't like have Black emotions. I mean, let's not oversubscribe what Blackness means. I mean, there is, let's focus on one's humanity, after all. That's what we share in common. However, history, cultural practices, economic, all these things layer themselves on, and then you add in this case, a color designation, Blackness, and then you've got, well, a Black way of looking at the world. And it's a code for many other things. And so what I said on that occasion, I don't wake up thinking black thoughts, but I am, of course, honored. I take seriously the representation of being the first black person to become the president of the university. But let me be clear, I'm not the first qualified black person. It's just now the Board of Governors felt that they were ready. So I have sort of this angry, and I say James Baldwin anger, like, not that I'm equating myself, but he had an angry love for the country. This sort of anger that if you're going to code blackness in a negative way, you're denying my humanity. Let's code blackness as a set of cultural practices, experiences, music, just all these different ways that make a person human. And let's do something radical, and let's presume that blackness could mean excellence. Let's presume that blackness could be all these great, complicated ways of living in the world. It's just like turning it upside down, basically. So, the thing I don't control is that when I walk into a room where nobody knows me, I believe they are seeing a fairly tall, light-skinned black male. What that means is, and they're saying, "Boy, he looks good." But the way I experience it in anticipatory fashion, and this is really the burden of it, I walk into a room, and very seriously, with my antenna up. Like I'm a black man walking into a space I don't know. So when I think about, to be like really honest, what I think it means to be black, it means to take sort of, I'm determined to tell a different story about human potential. I'm determined to say that excellence could look like everybody in this room. But I'm aware that I'm not in control of how other people view me when I walk in the space. I come from a very privileged background. I am very privileged. But when I walk in the room, I don't have control. And so that means I don't walk in a space ever with presumptive confidence.
That's a hell of an answer, man. Can you react in terms of what you just heard, Tahisha, in terms of how you feel when you walk into a room? Including this room?
For me, when you were speaking, I saw myself. I truly did, President Holloway, especially, when I became the first black president of the National Association of Secretaries of State, and it took 119 years, right? Walking into the room, making sure I oversaw the association, of course. I had the antenna up, but I knew that the mission was for me to reflect that black is excellence. And I think that that's what our ancestors, in their own ways, were doing during this time historically. They had to be innovative, creative, secretive, just to show the power of the person. And, that's why I was so intrigued, undergrad, just exploring, because it is a debate, Professor Blakeman, you also know, that, race can be seen as this social construct so that there's a group of people who are looked upon a certain way. And so for me, again, being president, I just wanted it to be reflected that Tahisha Way is a proud Secretary of State hailing from the greatest state in this nation who is competent, or my governor would have never appointed me. So I have those same feelings, moving forward. And I just think that is so important. And I'm thankful that this is why we're having these talks, these discussions, and really are leading the way nationally, thanks to you, Gov, and your team, Sarah Curitan, in telling the entirety of this 250th.
Those are pretty profound answers, guys. Michael and I feel like I'm on the outside looking in right now. Wow. Michael, let me ask you a question. Answer this. It could be answered in a variety of ways. I heard what you said when you said that, in fact, that paradox or riddle as Jonathan called it, actually led to some good. But all of us probably associate the 1860s with a big, obviously, a war and a quantum move. If I understand the math right, any color on any of this would be great. New Jersey was kind of, its black population around the revolution or the founding of the country was similar to New York. But if you roll, it might be Sarah or Carrie gave me these data points. You rolled forward like to the 1830s. New Jersey had a huge disproportionate amount of the African American population in the North, in the entire North, and was one of the slowest states anywhere, but especially the North, to have finally gotten its act together, ratified the 13th Amendment, et cetera, et cetera. Any color around any of that you can share with us?
So sure, New Jersey was one of the largest slave states in the North before the Revolution, second to New York, I think. About something like 6% of the population was enslaved at the time of the Revolution. And it was, although it is a northern state kind of, indisputably through the lens of the 19th century, it was one of the last northern states to act against slavery, which is kind of its own historical puzzle.
Right. It's so hard to fathom that given who we are today.
Yeah. I mean, in 1804,
riddle.
New Jersey enacts its gradual abolition law, and before then, I mean, New York, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Hampshire had all in some way acted against slavery. And I think this is a big question that historians are trying to figure out why. One of the things I try to teach my students is that history isn't just a repository of facts, and it's also not just a time period. History is also like a verb. It's a process of continually asking new questions and trying to come up with new answers. And I hope in the course of, the sort of energy inspired by the New Jersey 250th for new approaches to new questions in history, that historians might build a better answer than we currently have to the question of why New Jersey was one of the latest northern states to act against slavery.
Do you shine a particular light in your class, either of you, on New Jersey, or you lean more broadly America?
I shine some light on New Jersey, especially the first day. The first day of my lecture course on the American Revolution is
you open up by telling somebody to go to hell or something, and remind them that you're in New Jersey. Excuse me.
They have the opportunity to drop for the first couple of weeks, so I try to win them over in the first couple of weeks of class. I start with a lecture on Princeton and the American Revolution, both the kind of canonical stories of the Battle of Princeton and Congress being at Princeton, but also the more human-level stories that have come to light in recent years about Princetonians of all stripes. There were Lenape people in Princeton during the American Revolution. There were free and enslaved black people. There were women in Princeton during the American Revolution, and their stories are essential to telling the history of Princeton and the Revolution. So that's how I start.
Jonathan, do you lean more America?
Yeah, I do. So I teach a course in the fall semester. I mean, I need to teach in order just to sort of feel grounded in true passions of mine. But I teach a course called Citizenship Institutions in the Public, where I bring in, it's a pass no credit course. I bring in leaders of different sectors, media, law, arts, nonprofit, for-profit, to talk to them about what citizenship means and what democracy means. And the point of that class is it's not New Jersey based, although I do have major New Jersey players as my guests. But we are so acculturated these days to talk about those things that divide us. We all know that. I actually believe that we share more in common than we don't. And so my class is focused on that. And I invite people, and I tell my class, I've invited these people who also share my concerns about citizenship and democracy in this country. They really have different opinions. I mean, I really disagree with them on some certain things. If I do my job, though, you won't know who they are. Because I'm going to focus on what we share in common. and that's been very exciting to see. Buster Sores is the most prominent New Jersey person
We love Buster.
that I've had, and he provided incredible. He was Buster. I mean, he just
Former Secretary of State, Tahisha,
Yes.
one of your predecessors, right?
yeah. He just really.
Montclair? Oh, I associate him with the Franklin. Okay, Montclair.
I'll say the Reverend clarified things for I'll just put it like that.
Such a diplomatic verb. Tahisha, back over to you, kiddo.
Sure. I think this is important, right? Because we're trying to launch. We will be launching the Black Heritage Trail, right? Which touches upon,
Yeah,
yes, the 200.
you got to make sure this brewery is on the trail.
That's right. I had to lift this one up because, of course, we're showcasing all of the richness and Black history and culture across the state. So let me get this right. The trail includes a number of sites tied to the Revolutionary period. Specifically, we have Washington Crossing, Princeton Battlefield, the Nathaniel Drake House, the Red Bank Battlefield, and Ashbrook Swamps Homestead Plantation. So, my question to both of the distinguished professors, is there a revolutionary site of significance that we should add to this list?
That's definitely for you.
Yeah, I got one. If anybody's ever spent a sunny Saturday strolling around Princeton, you might be familiar with the Pancake House, which I'm not proposing. You might be familiar with the Little Theater on the corner, which I'm also not proposing. But in between the two is an 18th century house known as the Bainbridge House. And the Bainbridge House was home in the 18th century to an enslaved man named Prime. He was enslaved by the Bainbridge family of Princeton. Absalom Bainbridge was a physician. He was a Princeton alum. And eventually he became a loyalist. And so for Prime, Lieutenant Governor Way, you were talking about enslaved people during the Revolution fleeing to British lines as a pathway to freedom. For Prime, that script was flipped. If he was going to seek a path to freedom, it couldn't be with the British because his enslaver was a loyalist. And so his only opportunity was to seek freedom among the patriots, among the Continentals. He was confiscated by the state of New Jersey when the state started confiscating loyalists' property, land, homes, personal effects, enslaved people. And he had the good fortune that the person who was charged by the state with auctioning him off among the Bainbridge's other effects saw this contradiction at the heart of the American Revolution, saw the absurdity of trying to fund a war for liberty through, in this case, selling enslaved people, and said, maybe you should join the Continental Army. Maybe that would be a path to freedom. So he did. He served, as far as we know, I think, as a cart driver for years during the American Revolution. He eventually came back to Trenton and lived as a free man, and then questions arose about his status, and so he had to spend several years suing or filing petitions and participating in court cases to try to determine whether he was free or enslaved, many of which mobilized that rhetoric of liberty and slavery that the colonists had kind of piloted in presenting their complaints to the crown. Ultimately, he wound up being one of 3 enslaved men freed for their military service to the Patriot cause by the New Jersey legislature. And a law was passed manumitting just Prime, the individual. And the house where he lived and worked and was enslaved still stands in Princeton.
Wow.
Oh,
I just want to audit your classes. That's really cool. I love the fact when history is not seen as some dry or dusty archive, but it is all around us. I mean, I always forget who said this, but it's a Southern writer. The past is never the past. I mean, it's like it's always happening, right? So I'm going to do the classic smart aleck student and say, well, I'm going to answer a different question than the one you asked. Because I'm
that's
not
the line of business I'm in, by the way, as well.
but since I'm not a revolutionary historian, it's not the era. one of the great alums of Rutgers is Paul Robeson. And now this speaking about history always being alive, when I was in grad school, I was studying Paul Robeson, but Rutgers was not talking about him. When I considered putting my name in the hat for the position, I went to Rutgers.edu and was astonished to see, delighted, but to see Paul Robeson as the centennial of his graduation splashed everywhere, and the places on the campus are named after Robeson. It's like, this is amazing. So Rutgers finally got the courage to reclaim one of their great alumni. There's a long story I don't have time to get into. But Robeson was raised close to New Brunswick in Somerville, New Jersey, and there is a vibrant African-American community. So I can't give you the specifics like Michael just did with that great story. But more and more we're seeing public historians invested in, and I think you might have mentioned a few places that are like this, invested in trying to capture not just a person or physical place or something that merits a statue, but something that captures a way of life that is, I think it's in Brooklyn, Weeksville, blanking on something like that in Brooklyn, but like enclaves where African Americans lived. There's an AME church, I believe it's St. Thomas AME Church, don't hold me to that, in Somerville. But that was sort of the base of a black community, and there are all these other places around it where people, I mean, in contemporary parlance, it was a safe space where they could actually practice a trade, socialize with one another openly and freely. And to the extent that we can, and there's attempts to do that in Somerville, to the extent that that could be part of that work. Again, that's not a revolutionary era history, I confess. It's a 20th century, 19th to 20th century thing. But I'll be happy to send you a memo about this on the side.
We'll take it. Tahisha and I will take it. Can you guys help us remember this? Is that possible? On Somerville in particular? Hey, let me ask you, Tahisha, if it's okay with you, what's the best website for people to go on and get our programming for Crossroads or...
RevNJ.org.
I should have known that. RevNJ.org will give you a whole rundown of all of our programming, and there's some pretty cool stuff. There's a countdown clock and all sorts of cool stuff. I'll highlight one cool thing that's in September. I'm going to forget the date. But, Ken Burns, the documentarian, is doing a multi-part documentary on the American Revolution. And we got Ken to come on down in September. Brian Williams, formerly of NBC, is going to interview him and show, basically it's kind of a world premiere of this, show a bunch of different segments, not the entirety of the many-part program, but that's one of many cool things that we've got, so we'll make sure that everybody knows how to find that. Tish, any last words of wisdom from you?
This just has been a great conversation, lifting up the whole perspective of 250th, and I thank the distinguished professors, and of course you, Gov.
Right back at you. Denise and Leo, thank you again so much for hosting us so graciously. Amen. To Jonathan and Michael, I mean, do yourself a favor and look up their scholarship, their work, their writings. These are two of the rock stars in this broad space that exist in this entire country, if not beyond. And I'll just end other than saying thank you to Jonathan and Michael on behalf of Tahisha and myself. To repeat with a heavy heart, we could not be having this conversation at a more significant, maybe is a diplomatic word, time in our nation's history. So thank you all so much again, Jonathan, Michael, Tahisha. God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.